So today we're combining the last three videos that we've done, and we're doing the UK parties in the US election without the top two parties, Conservative and Labour. So we've got Reform, we've got Green, we've got Lib Dems. I'm not including Workers' Party or the national parties like Scottish National Party, any Northern Irish parties, the Welsh parties. They're not being included. No one below Workers' Party is getting included. They're just not significant enough. And we've got a map of the UK election, and we've got the American polls that we can go through. So we're already on Florida on RCP on 538, not RCP. So we can go straight to Florida. I think again, abortion is not really on the ballot, not considered in the UK. So in the US, Reform would kind of be forced to take the Republican stance on it. Republican and Reform are very similar in certain ways, in terms of immigration being a big focus, and big leaders, polarizing leaders, charismatic leaders, but it seems to work. And there's only one right-wing party in this event, so you're not splitting the right-wing vote with Green and Lib Dem, especially in New England and maybe towards California area. You might be starting to split your vote. So we can start in Florida. I think that would be a fairly comfortable Reform win. We'll go likely down there. Georgia, you got big far right movement down there, or larger than most. But you've got a lot of black turnout, obviously. So immigration obviously is very different in the UK. It's about, as you can see, Reform won 5 seats. 4 are on the coast because it's about the small boats. The immigration, that is. Obviously, you do get smugglers still, but smuggling is the big problem in the US, whereas in the UK, it's less of a problem. It's still a problem, but it's less of a problem. So it's all about small boats. So black voters maybe would be more inclined to vote for Reform, especially because you've got Lib Dem, who are not, they present as sort of centre to centre left. They're left wing, Green are left wing. So if you're sort of a moderate in this sense, Lib Dems are not necessarily your option. So I do think Georgia would go to Reform, probably unlikely as well, because again you're splitting the left wing vote between Green and Lib Dem. Still, maybe Green's not so popular down there, but I think you're probably looking at a Reform at 47-48%, and Lib Dems probably at about 40, and then Green hoovering up the rest. So South Carolina, I think, definitely goes to Reform. Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, these kind of go without saying. These are Republican strongholds, right-wing strongholds, and if you're not putting another right-wing party forward, I don't think you're going to take any of these safe Republican states off of Reform. Oklahoma and Kansas, they tend to be slightly more liberal than the rest of these states, but I still think they go pretty comfortably to Reform. Maybe you could put it as a likely margin, but I think that would be pretty safe. Also, Hawaii, I'd give to Green on a lean. I think they'd dominate over Lib Dems. Lib Dems would be the challengers there. Reform would just not get anywhere near enough vote share. If we look at the polls on 538 for not Idaho, for Hawaii, Trump's pulling in 27. That's on a Kennedy poll. 34, 38. So yeah, I think Green would take that pretty comfortably, because even if you split the left-wing vote in half, you're still competitive with Reform. So I don't think Reform have any sort of chance there. Alaska, I think, would go to Reform as well. Reform kind of protecting religious values more than any other, promoting religious values, so I think they'd go there. Immigration, a big problem in Illinois. It's not a border state, but every state is a border state, that's the phrase. So I still think Lib Dems would take it, because obviously it's a problem. Trump's the leader on immigration, leading in the polls rather, and he's still nowhere near winning in Illinois. Green, I don't think, would do so well here, so I think Illinois would go probably likely Lib Dem, once you factor in Green, will take 15, maybe 10%. As a bigger party, obviously there is a Green Party in America, but as a bigger party, I think they would take a little bit more off. So, Minnesota, this is an interesting one because this is kind of, well, it was competitive probably a month ago. It's maybe not so competitive anymore. But Green and Lib Dems again would split this vote, and that would bring reform into the equation. I do think Lib Dems would again take this home. I think Green Party just would struggle because Lib Dems are just the bigger party, and they are kind of the most similar to the Democrats in that sense. And the Greens don't even have a single leader, so it's kind of hard to get on board with them in a big state in terms of population and geography. Whereas Hawaii's a little bit smaller, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, they may do better in those states. So we can go to Washington and Oregon, where again I don't think Green will do very well. It will be a Lib Dem versus Reform showdown. I think it is probably what you'd say 58% Liberal and 42% right wing. So if you had to push people to pick a side, so do Green take 16%? That would be probably not. So I think you'd go likely in both of those states as well. No safe Lib Dem state yet. Colorado I think would be, just because Green again not really a factor down there, and a lot of California voters. California are going to swing that. Again, this is where Green will probably get their highest amount of votes, not vote share, but highest amount in California. But again, I think they just would not bring enough of the percentage down enough to be competitive themselves or to bring reform into it. So 160 to 4 to 113, so it's a race to 268 at the moment. We have, where should we go next? We could go to Texas, which I think would be a reform win by a likely margin. I think New Mexico would be a Lib Dem win by safe or likely. We'll go likely. Maybe reform get within 8-9%. Reform already at 200 here, but now New York, that would be a safe Democrat or liberal Democrat win. New Jersey would be, I'd probably go safe. DC, very liberal, you'd go Lib Dem. Maryland, you'd go Lib Dem. Delaware, Lib Dem. So again, it's kind of similar to Democrats and Republicans, but there are certain differences. Oregon and Washington, a bit more competitive. So the swing states will make a difference. Reform, I think, win Indiana as well. So where should we go? We could go to New England and talk a little bit about Green. So Maine would be a interesting one. I think in the north, Reform would take it fairly comfortably in the 2nd district, and then in this bottom district, I'd actually go Green, probably on a lean. I really think Green would be able to pick off the further left voters. Maybe Lib Dems wouldn't present as more left than they would need to be in this state. Maybe they try to play the moderates a little bit more nationwide. So I say Green picked that one off, and I think in the state overall, Lib Dems would definitely be competitive. You could just see it split 3 different ways. But again, I think I'd lean Green. I think I would. Maybe this would be a likely Green, and then you go lean Green here. Vermont, I think, would go to Green on a lean basis. New Hampshire would definitely be competitive between these two. I don't think Reform would get enough. Even if you split the vote, I think it would be a New Hampshire going to Lib Dems just. Connecticut, I think, would go likely. That's Massachusetts, same story. And I think Rhode Island would go safe Lib Dem. So we're at 212 to 202. It's the race to 265 now. We've given a little bit more to the Greens, 6 more electoral votes. So the race to 265. I think this 2nd district in Nebraska would go to Lib Dem. I think, again, because you're playing the moderates down there, Iowa would go to reform, perhaps not so safe. Maybe you could energize the moderates to vote Lib Dem. Green, I don't think, would do very well there, so you're not necessarily losing your left-wing voters there. So maybe likely. I don't think it would go lean. I think you keep it at likely. Wisconsin. I think Michigan. Okay, so I think Michigan would go reform on a tilt because immigration is a big problem, and I think reform, sort of a more classic base party. I think they'd promote the auto industry, whereas Lib Dems would, of course, try and promote the electric vehicle industry. So you go probably leaning, tilting Michigan down there, and that could be a big win. Ohio, again, moderates would really lean towards Lib Dem. It is shifting to the right, so maybe I think it would be a lean reform. I think it would be really close. I don't think Green are really a factor down there. Wisconsin, really tough one. So what sort of working class area, a lot of rural areas. I do think then reform would take this on a lean. Pennsylvania, I think, again, you're playing the moderates here. I really think Lib Dems would take this by a fairly handsome margin, a likely margin. Virginia, I think Lib Dems take it by a likely margin. So, we got Arizona, we got Nevada, we got North Carolina. Lib Dems need to win all three to win. So, where should we start? North Carolina definitely going to be a polarizing one. But I think the difference maker is Green Party there. I think they just take enough votes off of Lib Dem. Maybe it's 8%, but that's enough. Maybe they get 6, 7, 8%. If it was a real campaign, Lib Dems would invest there and probably eliminate the Green vote, attacking Green in the state. But I'm gonna say it would go to Lib Dems, or it would go to Reform. Sorry, on a probably a likely margin, to be honest. Once you split that vote, I'd probably go likely. So we're at 276 to 235 to 10. Michigan, the big difference maker here, definitely. Otherwise, we'd be at 261 to 250. Arizona, I think, would go Lib Dem. Again, more moderates, and California, people moving out there, not necessarily too concerned with the green issue. It's not top of their agenda. So I think Lib Dems, who would be more liberal on reform, of course, on abortion, of course, would play that side, but also play the moderates, and I think they'd win Arizona by a fairly comfortable margin, maybe a safe margin. I don't think Green would really. Maybe Green could pick off again 8, 9, 10, 11. It's closer to California, so maybe, and you've got a lot of Californians there, so maybe you do get a higher Green vote share. But I think Lib Dems would just align perfectly with that state. And then Nevada, so you're looking at working class sort of people working in hospitality. I think really tough one. I don't think any of these parties necessarily translate perfectly, but I think Lib Dems just take it on a liberal sort of swing. It is more liberal than it is right wing, so you'd probably lean Lib Dem, and that means that Michigan, if you were to tilt it to Lib Dems, they would have won. But that was the difference maker. It was reform taking Michigan. Even if you give Lib Dems the green votes, or the green electoral votes, they still lose. So Green not directly impacting, but by vote share definitely impacting in places like maybe Texas. It could have been a little bit closer, maybe North Carolina, Nevada. Maybe I really think this Arizona state would be likely. Green definitely could make an impact in Michigan as well. Wisconsin maybe, and obviously Vermont and Maine. They took the electoral votes off, but that wouldn't have made a difference. So overall, Reform narrow win. I think this is fairly similar to the map we'll see on the US election in November, just that probably Pennsylvania would go to Republicans, Michigan would probably go to Democrats right now, Uh, Arizona, Nevada would go to Republicans, and Wisconsin maybe would go to Democrats. So some minor differences. Iowa not being safe. Ohio, I guess, kind of not being safe. Well, it's a lean right now, I think. Yeah, it's on a lean. So a couple of minor differences. Connecticut, Massachusetts, not really any safe states because of the Green stealing the vote and sort of bringing it closer together with reform. But again, overall, Green really not making the not making the difference in face value, but under the layers, they have taken vote share away. Florida would be a big difference maker as well. And so overall, I think Reform would take it 276, Lib Dem 252, Green 10.